In the years following World War II, the world wanted nothing more than peace, stability, hope. Families were rebuilding. Cities were rising from rubble. Science was the new religion, and medicine was its most trusted prophet. And in that atmosphere of optimism, trust, and relief, a small German pharmaceutical company handed the world a pill. They called it a miracle. It was not a miracle. It begins, as so many pharmaceutical disasters do, with a discovery that seemed too good to be true. The year is 1954, West Germany. A company called Grünenthal, originally a soap and cosmetics manufacturer that had pivoted to pharmaceuticals after the war, was hunting for new products. Their head of research, Heinrich Muchter, had gained his scientific experience working with the German army during World War II. Now, he was in the business of healing. One of Muchter's assistants, a chemist named Wilhelm Kunz, was working on preparing reagents, the basic chemical ingredients used in research. In the process, he isolated a byproduct. It seemed unremarkable at first, but when the company's pharmacologist, Herbert Keller, examined it, something caught his eye. The molecule looked similar to a known sedative. They began refining it, testing it on mice, on rats, on rabbits. The results came back clean. No toxic dose could be established in animals. You could give enormous quantities to a rodent, and it simply went to sleep and woke up. No deaths, no overdoses. For a world terrified of barbiturate poisonings, in those days sleeping pill overdoses were a leading method of suicide, this seemed extraordinary. They named the compound thalidomide. On October 1, 1957, Chemie Grünenthal launched it commercially in West Germany under the brand name Contergan. The marketing was masterful. Grünenthal promoted contergan as the safest sedative ever created. Their advertisements used phrases like non-toxic and no known toxicity. It was sold over the counter, no prescription required. Any German could walk into a pharmacy and buy it. Mothers bought it for morning sickness. Fathers bought it to sleep after long shifts. Doctors recommended it for anxiety. By 1960, West Germans were consuming 1 million doses of thalidomide every single day. It captured 40% of the German sedative market almost overnight. Grünenthal, smelling money on an industrial scale, began licensing the drug to companies around the world. Within a few years, thalidomide was being sold in nearly 50 countries: the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Japan, Brazil, and dozens more, under different brand names, but the same molecule. One market that was especially appealing was the United States, the largest, most lucrative pharmaceutical market on Earth. Grünenthal licensed the American rights to a Cincinnati company called Richardson Merrill, which rebranded the drug as Kevadon. In September 1960, Richardson Merrill submitted their application to the United States Food and Drug Administration. They expected a rubber stamp. 1 month before Richardson Merrill filed their application, a new medical officer had joined the FDA. She was 45 years old, Canadian-born, trained in both pharmacology and medicine at the University of Chicago, and had previously worked as an editor at the Journal of the American Medical Association. Her name was Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey, and thalidomide was literally the first drug application handed to her desk. Richardson Merrill was not worried. After all, thalidomide had already been approved in over 20 countries. It had been used by millions of people. There had been no mass fatalities, no obvious disasters. The company assumed the FDA review would be a formality, maybe 60 days, and they would be selling Kevadon across America. But when Dr. Kelsey opened the application, she felt something was wrong. The documents were poorly organized. Many testimonials from doctors were more promotional than scientific. They read like advertisements, not clinical reports. There was no rigorous data on how the drug was absorbed by the human body. There were no long-term studies. And critically, there was almost nothing about what happened when thalidomide was taken during pregnancy. Under the rules of the day, the FDA could only withhold approval for 60 days at a time. So Kelsey did what she was legally entitled to do. She sent the application back to Richardson Merrill, requesting more data. They complied and submitted more material. Kelsey reviewed it. Still not enough. She sent it back again. This began a pattern that would last for over a year. Richardson Merrill was furious. Their sales representative, F. Joseph Murray, began calling Kelsey constantly. Letters, phone calls, unannounced visits to her office. He complained to her supervisors. He accused her of being obstructionist. He called her, by her own account, things she said you would not print. Murray's argument was simple and seemingly reasonable. Thalidomide had been in use for years in dozens of countries. Millions of people had taken it. Why was this one FDA reviewer holding everything up? But in December 1960, something arrived on Dr. Kelsey's desk that would change everything. It was a letter in the British Medical Journal, written by a British doctor named Leslie Florence. In it, Florence described something troubling. Some patients who had been taking thalidomide for extended periods were developing peripheral neuropathy, damage to the nerves in their hands and feet. They were experiencing tingling, numbness, pain. This was not just a side effect. This was evidence that thalidomide was not as biologically inert as Grünenthal claimed. It could penetrate the body's systems in ways they had not accounted for. And that made Kelsey think of something else. If thalidomide affected peripheral nerves, if it could cross biological barriers that were supposed to protect vital systems, could it cross the placental barrier? Could it reach a developing fetus? She added this question to her data requests. She demanded animal studies specifically designed to test the drug's effects on fetal development. Richardson Merrill told her there was no evidence of any danger to fetuses. They sent her what they described as reassuring data. But the data, as Kelsey and her colleagues later discovered, was selectively presented, and in some cases, misleading. The company had reportedly found birth defects in rat studies and simply had not included those results in the application. Dr. Francis Kelsey sent the application back. Again. While the bureaucratic battle was playing out in Washington, something was happening in hospitals across Europe and Australia that no one yet understood. It began with a statistical anomaly so rare it barely registered at first. Doctors started seeing newborns with a birth defect called phocomelia, a condition so uncommon that many physicians had never seen a single case in their entire careers. The word comes from the Greek for seal limb. In phocomelia, the long bones of the limbs, the arms, the legs, fail to develop properly in the womb. In some cases, the hands and feet appear to grow directly from the shoulders and hips. In severe cases, babies were born with no limbs at all. Before thalidomide, phocomelia occurred naturally in roughly 1 in 4 million births. By 1959 and 1960, German hospitals were seeing it with nightmarish regularity. In Hamburg, a pediatrician named Dr. Widukind Lenz began noticing the pattern. He was seeing clusters of these deformities, babies born to mothers who seemed to have nothing in common with each other. Different ages, different backgrounds, different hospitals, different cities. But Lenz was methodical. He started interviewing the mothers. He asked them what they had eaten, what they had been exposed to, what medications they had taken during the first weeks of pregnancy. a pattern emerged. In a study of 46 mothers who had given birth to children with phocomelia, 41 of them had taken contergan, thalidomide, during their pregnancies. On November 15, 1961, Dr. Lenz contacted Grünenthal directly. He told them he believed their drug was causing catastrophic birth defects. The company's response? They disputed his findings. They asked for more evidence. They delayed. Simultaneously, on the other side of the world, an obstetrician at Crown Street Women's Hospital in Sydney, Australia, Dr. William McBride, had reached the same conclusion through the same painful process. A midwife named Sister Pat Sparrow had first noticed that the babies being born to mothers under McBride's care were exhibiting strange and terrible deformities. McBride investigated. His letter to The Lancet, one of the world's most respected medical journals, appeared in December 1961. 2 doctors, 2 continents, one devastating conclusion. On November 27, 1961, the German government formally withdrew thalidomide from the market. The United Kingdom followed shortly after. But by then, the damage was done. When the accounting finally began, the numbers were almost incomprehensible. Across the world, an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 children were born with thalidomide-induced birth defects. The actual number may be higher still. Many cases went unrecognized, misattributed, or unreported. Of those children who were born with the most severe defects, roughly 40% died within their first year of life. Their bodies simply could not sustain themselves. In West Germany alone, where the drug had been available the longest and most widely, over 2,500 babies were born with severe phocomelia. In the United Kingdom, where the drug was sold as Distaval and marketed with advertisements describing it as safe even for pregnant women and nursing mothers, the toll reached into the thousands. Japan, Canada, Brazil, Australia. Each country counted its own losses. The survivors, and there are thousands of them still alive today, now in their 60s, grew up in a world that was not built for them. They became advocates, activists, athletes, artists, politicians. Lorraine Mercer, a British thalidomide survivor born with phocomelia of both arms and legs, carried the Olympic torch at the London 2012 Games. She is the only thalidomide survivor to have done so. Their resilience is extraordinary. But the fact that they had to be resilient in this way, that they were robbed of limbs and health by corporate negligence, is something that cannot be undone. Now, let us return to Washington, D.C. Because the United States of America had, by some extraordinary combination of institutional design and individual courage, almost entirely avoided this catastrophe. Almost. While European babies were being born with devastating deformities, Dr. Francis Kelsey's bureaucratic standoff with Richardson Merrill continued. The company had applied for approval 6 times. They had been refused 6 times. They had made 50 separate contacts, phone calls, letters, visits, with Kelsey and her supervisors. Her superiors at the FDA, to their great credit, stood behind her every time. In November 1961, the news broke in Europe. Thalidomide was being withdrawn from the German and British markets. The connection to birth defects was becoming undeniable. Richardson Merrill continued to pressure the FDA for approval. In March 1962, with the European catastrophe now fully public, Richardson Merrill finally withdrew their application. Thalidomide would not be sold commercially in the United States. But here is the part of the story that is less comfortable to tell. While the application was pending, Richardson Merrill had been distributing thalidomide across America under a loophole that allowed experimental distribution to doctors before formal approval. They had given it to 1,267 physicians across the country. Those doctors had prescribed it to patients, many of whom were pregnant women. In total, more than 20,000 Americans had ingested thalidomide. The FDA launched an urgent effort to track down every single one of them. In the end, 17 confirmed cases of thalidomide-induced birth defects were found in the United States. 17, against tens of thousands in Europe. The difference, the entire reason the number was 17 instead of 17,000, was one woman's refusal to sign a piece of paper. In July 1962, Washington Post reporter Morton Mintz broke the full story on the front page of the newspaper. Francis Kelsey became, overnight, a national hero. On August 7, 1962, President John F. Kennedy awarded her the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. At the time, only the second woman ever to receive the honor. At the ceremony, Kennedy said, "Her exceptional judgment in evaluating a new drug for safety for human use has prevented a major tragedy of birth deformities in the United States." When reporters asked Kelsey what she had done that was so special, she deflected, as she always did. She credited her assistants and her supervisors who had backed her. "I was just doing my job," she said. Francis Kelsey's story is one of heroism. But to fully understand the thalidomide disaster, we must spend time with a darker question. What did Hemi Grünenthal know, and when did they know it? The first thalidomide-affected baby to be identified was born on Christmas Day, 1956, before the drug was even officially launched on the German market. That child was the daughter of a Hemi Grünenthal employee. In 1959, a German doctor warned Grünenthal about reports of peripheral neuropathy in patients using contergan. The company's response was to dismiss the findings and settle legal threats out of court, quietly, keeping the information from regulators. In 1961, as Dr. Lenz was compiling his evidence, Grünenthal's own internal communications show executives discussing the danger and the need to protect the company's business interests. When Lenz contacted them directly in November 1961, they asked for more time. They wanted proof. They delayed. When the drug was finally withdrawn and the full horror became public, the German government prosecuted Grünenthal executives. The trial began in 1968 and ran until 1970. In the end, the case was settled out of court. The executives paid fines. No one went to prison. In 2012, 50 years after the disaster, Grünenthal's chief executive issued a formal apology. He said the company was sorry for the silence that had lasted for decades. The thalidomide survivor community's response was largely one of fury. An apology, 50 years late, from a company that had never been held criminally accountable, felt to many like an insult dressed as reconciliation. The company, to this day, continues to operate. It remains a private company, owned by the Wirtz family. And here is a detail that the history books often gloss over. In November 1944, a Nazi official named Fritz Termeer, a director at the chemical conglomerate IG Farben, which used slave labor from concentration camps during the war, sent a memo describing a drug compound with a chemical formula strikingly similar to thalidomide as having been tested and ready for use. The full implications of this document have never been definitively established. But the overlap in timing, personnel, and chemistry has haunted the thalidomide story for decades. This is not a story about evil in a vacuum. It is a story about what happens when profit, secrecy, and inadequate oversight collide inside systems that are supposed to protect us. For years after the disaster, scientists struggled to understand exactly how thalidomide caused such devastation. The mechanism was not obvious. After all, rats and mice given enormous doses during pregnancy had no abnormal offspring. Why was it so lethal to human fetuses? Thalidomide exists in two mirror-image molecular forms, called enantiomers. One form has sedative properties. The other is the one responsible for birth defects. It blocks the formation of new blood vessels. The drug that was manufactured and sold was a mixture of both forms. And here is the cruel twist of chemistry. Even if you took only the supposedly safe form, the human body converts it into the dangerous form. There is no way to administer thalidomide safely to a pregnant woman. The dangerous form will always be created inside her body. Dr. Kelsey, notably, had flagged the question of this molecular structure in her original review. The application from Richardson Merrill said nothing about it. That silence troubled her from the beginning. The timing of exposure was also devastatingly precise. Thalidomide caused its worst damage when taken between the 34th and 50th day of pregnancy, counting from the first day of the mother's last menstrual cycle. In those 2 weeks, the embryo's limbs are forming, its ears, its eyes, its heart, its intestines. A single dose of thalidomide taken on the wrong day could permanently alter the course of a child's development. And here is what makes this so tragic. Many women did not know they were pregnant at all during this window. They took a sleeping pill, a pill their doctor said was completely safe, and had no idea they had just changed their child's life forever. For years before the thalidomide story broke publicly in America, a Tennessee senator named Estes Kefauver had been on a crusade. He believed the American pharmaceutical industry had too much power and too little oversight. He had been trying for years to pass legislation that would require drug companies to prove that their drugs actually worked, not just that they probably would not kill you before they could sell them. His bill had stalled in Congress. The pharmaceutical lobby was powerful. His colleagues were lukewarm. Then, Morton Mintz's Washington Post story landed on every kitchen table in America. The public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Here was proof, in the most visceral possible terms, of what happened when drug oversight was inadequate. European babies, thousands of them, had been sacrificed on the altar of corporate convenience and regulatory weakness. The only thing that had protected American babies was a single bureaucrat who refused to be bullied. Congress moved with unusual speed. In October 1962, the Kefauver-Harris drug amendments were passed unanimously. Every member of Congress voted yes. The amendments transformed American pharmaceutical regulation. For the first time, drug companies were required to prove efficacy, not just safety, before marketing a drug. Companies were required to report adverse reactions to the FDA as they occurred. Informed consent from patients participating in clinical trials became a legal requirement. Pregnant women were formally removed from clinical trials, and the FDA's authority to oversee drug manufacturing, labeling, and advertising was dramatically expanded. President Kennedy, signing the bill, said, "In the terrible association between the drug and these very severe birth defects, the havoc wrought by this led to the 1962 amendments of the law." These amendments, born from Catastrophe, became the foundation of modern pharmaceutical regulation. Every clinical trial you have ever heard of, Every drug that comes with a package insert listing its risks. Every time a pharmaceutical company has to submit years of safety data before a drug reaches a pharmacy shelf, you can trace that standard, in part, back to a German sedative, 10,000 broken children, and one stubborn FDA reviewer who said no. Here is a twist that no one in 1961 could have anticipated. Thalidomide is still a drug. It is used today. It is, in certain very specific contexts, a valuable medicine. 1998. The United States FDA approved thalidomide for the treatment of a painful complication of leprosy. And later, it was approved as part of the treatment for multiple myeloma, a form of blood cancer. The key to this is the same mechanism that made it so dangerous in pregnancy. Thalidomide suppresses the growth of new blood vessels. In a developing fetus, this is catastrophic because blood vessel formation is essential to limb development. But in a tumor, cutting off the blood supply that tumors need to grow, that can be life-saving. The FDA approved thalidomide's return under one of the most stringent safety frameworks in the history of pharmaceutical regulation. Every patient who takes thalidomide must be registered in a national database. Women of childbearing age must take pregnancy tests regularly. Every prescriber must be certified. Every pharmacy that dispenses it must be authorized. Men taking the drug must use contraception, because thalidomide can be transmitted through semen. The system is exhaustive. It is, by design, almost impossible to inadvertently expose a pregnant woman to the drug. Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey continued working at the FDA for decades after the thalidomide affair. She led the Division of Scientific Investigations. She helped rewrite America's drug testing regulations. She worked to prosecute researchers who had submitted fraudulent data to the agency. She did not retire until 2005, at the age of 90. She died in 2015, at 101 years old. In 2000, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. In 2010, the FDA created the Dr. Frances O. Kelsey Award for Excellence and Courage in protecting the public health in her honor. Schools have been named for her. And yet, ask a random American on the street who Frances Kelsey was. Most will not know. There is something deeply human about that. We remember the disasters more vividly than the near misses. The tragedies we can see are more searing than the tragedies that were prevented. 10,000 damaged children in Europe are a documented horror. The hundreds of thousands of American children who were never harmed because of one woman's refusal, they are an absence, a silence. They do not know who they are. Their parents never had to grieve them. And so Frances Kelsey's protection of them goes largely uncelebrated. But what she teaches us, what this entire story teaches us, is something essential about the relationship between individuals, institutions, and power. She was a single person. She had no particularly extraordinary political power. She was a new employee. She was a woman in a field still dominated by men, in a decade when women's professional authority was routinely questioned. The company pressuring her was large, well-funded, and well-connected. They were already making money hand over fist in 20 other countries. And she said no. Not dramatically, not with speeches or protests. She said no by doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She demanded evidence. She read the science. She asked the questions that had not been asked. She refused to be rushed into a decision that affected the health of an entire population. In an interview late in her life, Kelsey was asked what she had been thinking during those long months of pressure from Richardson Merrill. She thought about it for a moment and then said something simple. She said she just kept thinking about the patients, the people who would actually take the drug. What would happen to them? You have to keep the patient in the center, she said. Everything else is secondary. Today, the thalidomide survivors, sometimes called the contergan generation in Germany, continue to fight. Not just for memory, but for material justice. Many spent decades with inadequate compensation. Their physical conditions, which require prosthetics, surgeries, adaptations of every kind, create enormous lifelong costs. Some governments have repeatedly had to be taken to court before providing additional support. In Australia, a landmark class action lawsuit led by Lynette Rowe, a woman born without limbs as a result of thalidomide, resulted in a settlement with the company that had distributed the drug in Australia. It was 2012. The drug had been withdrawn 50 years earlier. In Germany, Grünenthal continues to be a going concern. The company makes other pharmaceutical products. The Wirtz family remains wealthy. The criminal prosecution from the 1960s resulted in no prison sentences. It has been more than 60 years since thalidomide was withdrawn from European markets. And the world has changed. Drug regulation is stricter. Clinical trials are more rigorous. The FDA's authority is more robust than it has ever been. Pharmaceutical companies are legally required to disclose adverse events, to prove efficacy, to obtain informed consent. We built these systems because of thalidomide, because of the Kefauver-Harris amendments, because of Francis Kelsey. But it would be dangerous. It would be exactly the kind of complacency that allows disasters to happen, to assume the problem is solved. Regulatory agencies around the world remain chronically underfunded. The pharmaceutical industry is more powerful today than it was in 1960. The speed at which drugs are now developed and approved creates new pressures on the systems designed to protect us. The thalidomide story is not a cautionary tale from a more naive era. It is a template for how pharmaceutical disasters happen, and a guide for how they can be prevented. They are prevented by people like Francis Kelsey, by institutions with the independence and the funding to do their jobs without political interference, by scientific cultures that reward honesty about negative data rather than punishing it, by legal systems that actually hold corporations accountable when they cause mass harm. Every time you read the safety insert inside a medication, every time a drug company announces years of clinical trial data before bringing a drug to market, every time the FDA demands additional evidence before approving a new treatment, you are living inside a system that was shaped, in part, by the deaths and disabilities of 10,000 children who never had a voice. We owe it to them to remember. On October 1, 1957, a German pharmaceutical company launched a new sleeping pill into a world that trusted them. On November 27, 1961, that drug was withdrawn from sale in Germany. The damage, by then, was done. Across the world, an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 children were born with severe birth defects. Roughly 40% died in their first year. The survivors, those who lived, who fought, who built lives in bodies that had been harmed before they were born, are in their 60s now. They are still fighting for justice, for recognition, for adequate support. In the United States, one woman's refusal to approve an application without sufficient evidence meant the American toll was 17 confirmed cases, not tens of thousands. That woman, Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey, is not widely remembered. But the system she helped strengthen is still, imperfectly, doing the work she dedicated her life to. The drug that caused all of this, thalidomide, is still prescribed today to cancer patients under one of the most rigorous safety protocols in pharmaceutical history. Because the science is never simply good or evil. The context, the regulation, the transparency, and the accountability are what determine whether a molecule heals or harms. In the end, the thalidomide story is not really about a drug. It is about power. About who gets to decide what is safe and who bears the consequences when they are wrong. About the courage it takes to say no when enormous pressure is telling you to say yes. And about the systems we build, or fail to build, to protect the most vulnerable. The babies who were harmed could not protect themselves. They were protected, or not, by the choices of adults, scientists, regulators, executives, governments, who had the knowledge and the authority to act differently. That is always the story. That is always the responsibility.